On part four today, we're going to be looking at the Congress of the People and the Treason trial. The Congress of the People is in response to the key question of what does a non-apartheid South Africa look like? And what is the role in South Africa of non-Africans? What is the role in South Africa for Asians, for whites, for people of mixed race? What does a non-apartheid South Africa look like? And this is addressed through the Congress of the People. So the Congress of the People is an alliance of anti-apartheid organizations. It includes the ANC, the African National Congress, that's the largest organization, the South African Indian Congress, SAIC, the Colored People's Congress, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which is kind of a workers' organization, South African Congress Party, and the South African Congress of Democrats. The last one, the Congress of Democrats, is a white, left-wing white organization. So there's really two goals of the Congress of the People. The first goal is to bring in elements of society who are left out of the Defiance campaign, especially coloreds and impoverished or rural, poor black communities. And the second is to draft a freedom charter that states their goals, a kind of a document, a Bill of Rights, if you will, a constitution. So, again, the goals are one, to bring in the parts of South African society who are left out of the Defiance campaign, and the second, to draft a freedom charter that states their goals. So, this was done by a big conference in Kliptown, which is just outside of Johannesburg, in the summer of 1955. About 3,000 people attended, and it was actually broken up by the police on their second day. What came out of this meeting was the Freedom Charter, and it's in Canvas as file 6.9. I'd like you to take a moment right now to pause this video and go have a look at that. What you probably noticed as you were looking through the Freedom Charter is that it grants the right of people to govern. It grants freedoms regardless of race, regardless of sex. It creates equality before the law, equal access of education, housing, Medicare. It's a pretty striking document. It does a lot. It calls for a lot. One thing I noticed the first time I looked through the Freedom Charter was each section is a statement with an exclamation point after it. This emphatic punctuation really stood out to me. From the Congress of the People's perspective, the Freedom Charter was an attempt to redress the grievances of non-white South Africans and to restore human rights to all South Africans. And this served as a kind of Bill of Rights that guided the constitution that was written in South Africa in the 1990s after Mandela was freed from prison. So when we look at the constitution later, we'll come back again to the Freedom Charter. There's two key points here. The Africanist wing of the ANC resented one of the lines in the Freedom Charter, which is that South Africa, quote, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. So the ANC had sort of two branches or wings. There's the Africanist wing, who is focused on black Africans, and then there was the multiracial coalition within the ANC. And the Africanist wing wanted a superior, or at least a prior position in post-apartheid South Africa. There's also a second part or section in the Freedom Charter that's worth taking note of, and that's a section that reads, "The people shall share in the country's wealth." Well, that sure seems like a call for nationalization of industry. What nationalization of industry means is you have a private company and you say this private company is now taken over by the government. Now it's a government organization. So this kind of moves in a a system, you have nationalization of industry when industry goes from private to national. And you also have privatization when you go from something that's government and making it independent companies. So, for example, if the United States got rid of the Postal Service and turned it over to organizations like FedEx or UPS, that would be privatization. Some people move to, or would like the United States to move to privatization of public schools, for example. We have nationalization of industry in Nehru's time, and we also see it quite widespread in Latin America in the 20th century. I think it's useful to see this line, all people shall share in the country's wealth, within a Cold War context. This worried some who felt this was a backdoor to communism. It's worth noting this line was added kind of last minute by a guy named Ben Turok. So, what is the Freedom Charter and how should we think of it? Should we think of it as dangerous revolutionary propaganda trying to overthrow the government? Or is it the establishment of human rights? Well, the National Party viewed it as a threat to white supremacy, viewed it as a threat to capitalism, viewed it as a very threat to the existence of the government. And this led forward a new phase in the government response, which is legal challenges against anti-apartheid groups for treason and insurrection, and led to legal challenges, court cases. And the biggest court case was a big marathon legal proceeding known as the Treason trial. So the Treason trial was in response to the Congress of the People. It was response to the Freedom Charter. And the following year, in 1956, 156 members of the Congress of the People were arrested. And you can see their photo there, right? And they were tried for treason. Treason, in this particular case, was understood as the violent overthrow of the government and the institution of communism. So a communist attempt to violently overthrow the government. Interestingly, the trial, by having these 156 individuals brought together, brought leadership from across the country together in one place. These individuals were allowed bail, and so they would meet and discuss and confer and cement relationships, which is probably not the National Party's intention. This was a very, very slow trial, as you can see at the dates at the top. It went for about 4 years, from late 56 to 61. And in fact, none of them were found guilty. The courts determined that the Freedom Charter was not a communist attempt to violently overthrow the government, but rather agreed with the defense, and that the Freedom Charter was a response to white supremacy. The court said that the Freedom Charter represented a vision for the future rather than incitement to overthrow the government. I just wanted to show you this photo because I really love this photo. This photo was taken by Eli Weinberg in Johannesburg on the opening day of the Treason trial in December of '56. I love this photo in part because of this little boy here. Who is this boy? We don't actually know who this boy is. There's been some exhaustive investigation into this photo and into this boy, and the boy's identity to this day is unknown as far as I know. But his body language is very striking. Some have suggested that it's the photographer's child, but that's unknown. The other thing I want to bring your attention to in this photograph is the women right here have a thumbs up. Right there, right there, right there. This is the ANC symbol, or like, instead of a fist, it's the thumbs up, the ANC thumbs up. And if you were to zoom in here, you would see a number of individuals down here, right here, right here, right here, have a thumbs up. So as you look forward into other pictures, you can see the ANC thumbs up. This is a photograph of Nelson Mandela during the Treason trial. And this photo was 1958. So Mandela would be turning 40 this year, so he's 39, 40 years old in this photograph. What's significant also and worth mentioning is this trial publicized the anti-apartheid movement across Africa and across the world. It's worth noting what's going on in Africa in 1958. A year prior, Ghana is the first African state to be granted independence. It's granted independence in 57, and many others are freed during the years of the Treason trial. In particular, 1960 and 1961, most of French West Africa is freed in 60-61. This is the rest of Africa is becoming independent during the Treason trial. The other thing worth noting here is the 1950s led to the creation of nationally and internationally recognized non-white leadership and the creation of white allies. If you were to look around, if you were to conduct a survey in 1950 and say, who's the political leadership in South Africa that's non-white or anti-apartheid, you'd be hard-pressed to name names. But 10 years later, there is clear leadership that's recognized nationally and internationally. So the state loses the case, yes, but the state did get some benefits out of this. It disrupted momentum within the ANC. It created power vacuums within the ANC, and it led to a growing split between the Africanist wing and the multiracial wing of the ANC, and more on this later. This photograph here is when the verdict comes through in 61, and these two individuals are pretty prominent individuals. We have Walter Sisulu, who's one of the individuals who serves a life sentence with Mandela on Robben Island, and this woman here hugging him is Amina Kachalia, and she is married to Yusuf Kachalia, who's also a prominent anti-apartheid activist. She's Indian. Just an interesting side note, in the 1990s, Nelson Mandela was released from jail, and he actually proposes marriage to Amina in the 1990s, and she refuses to marry Nelson Mandela out of loyalty to her late husband, Yusuf. Just an interesting side note. So what are the lessons learned here out of the treason trial? Well, the ANC comes out of this having ended the era of mass action, having ended nonviolent civil disobedience. Those days are over. The days of peaceful protest and popular mobilization are seen as insufficient. They're seen as not enough to overthrow apartheid. So starting in 60, 61, resistance begins to look very different from the Defiance Campaign days of the early 50s. So there is in that sense, a radicalization of the ANC, SAIC movement. Okay, we'll end here. Next time we come back up, we'll be looking at homelands and the Bantustan system.